Wake up! Wake up, wake up, wake up! Up you wake, up you wake, up you wake, up you wake!
In July of 2024, JD Vance was announced as the vice presidential candidate for the Burn the World as Long as I Get to Burn in a Bed of Money party. And that announcement has resurfaced his 2016 book,
Hillbilly Elegy, a memoir of a family and a culture in crisis.
Depicts what it's like to grow up white and poor in America.
Vance's book has been credited with identifying the so-called forgotten Americans.
Author JD Vance wrote about the disaffection felt by the country's working class in Hillbilly Elegy.
An America that, frankly, too many in this room probably don't see.
You also wrote about your and their struggles in your book
and landed on the bestseller list.
JD Vance is one of the most interesting people we know.
And Americans don't like reading books. I don't even like reading books. It's just too hard. So they're instead consuming the film adaptation of the same name, directed by Academy Award-winning filmmaker Ron Howard. And the film is...
Careful. Oh, I got him. Get it.
For a director who's been able to create memorable sequences and foster iconic performances from his actors, Hillbilly Elegy feels like a fake movie that you see in other movies. I really hate the term Oscar bait because I think it paints a cynical view of the reasons why people make certain kinds of films. But damn, this is some Oscar bait. Prestige actors with prosthetic makeup that make them unrecognizable, a real-life protagonist, a period piece. I mean, look at this trailer.
I thought your mama was gonna be all right. I know. I could have done better. You want to be somebody or not?
I always land on my feet.
You let her get away with this every time.
Are you just too lazy to try?
JD. Oh, I tried! Plenty! Or someone else is gonna have to step in. Who? Huh? Who? Family's the only thing that means a goddamn.
And it seems that after about 2 days of the media glazing JD Vance, everyone was like, wait, this guy's an absolute freak.
It's just having kids actually makes you a better person. I believe this very deeply.
And the evidence on this, by the way, is like super clear.
That's the whole purpose of the postmenopausal female in theory.
And yes, I made a sarcastic comment years ago that I think that a lot of Democrats have willfully misinterpreted. If you're a miserable cat lady, you should not force your misery on the rest of the country. They just get really upset about it. And I think, by the way, Tucker, it's a good thing that they get upset about it. I never, Dana, criticize people for not having kids.
The people who are most deranged and most psychotic are people who don't have kids at home.
Are you a racist? Do you hate Mexicans?
September 9th, you amplified what you said yourself were rumors about Haitian migrants eating pets. Yesterday, you posted a video claiming Africans are grilling cats in Dayton.
Are we not allowed to talk about this in the United States of America, Margaret?
Again.
But it wasn't just a meme.
Create stories so that the American media actually pays attention to the suffering of the American people, then that's what I'm going to do, Dana.
You just said that you're creating
a story.
about
Public policy.
So in this video, we're going to lightly cover many things. What is the point of biopics, adaptations, why this film is so embarrassing, Ron Howard's involvement, why all of this is disingenuous political theater, and I don't know, other things possibly. I don't know.
Philip Roseman. JD Vance.
If someone ever introduces themselves to me with fucking initials, I'm hitting them. Before we begin, I would like to express that there is validity in someone from a poor background telling their story of abuse, dealing with addiction, and everything in between. Autobiography is a form of expression that has many stages of catharsis, which is why so many people do it. And oftentimes your experience is validated. What a biopic does is it takes someone's life and is similar to what an autobiography does, but cements it as visual iconography. It exists in very neutral and objective terms as propaganda, but propaganda itself is subjective, and so is lived experience. So how can someone really be telling the truth when they make a film about themselves?
The first obvious example that comes to mind is the 2015 blockbuster biopic Straight Outta Compton about the rap group NWA, produced by both Ice Cube and Dr. Dre, who are conveniently the only two insanely rich and living members from the group, come out of the film pristine and unscathed, while the only person resembling assembling a character with actual flaws was Eazy-E, who is dead. The reasons for making the film weren't for the artistic purpose of trying to understand these men and the moment they were meeting, but instead it was for strictly commercial reasons, with Marvel-esque reference humor.
Bye, Felicia.
Whether intentional or unintentional, people have a hard time with self-awareness or acknowledging or seeing the flaws in their character, because ego is so incredibly powerful. So sometimes it's almost better for a third party to make a film about another person.
The film that comes to mind is David Fincher's 2010 opus, The Social Network, which was panned by Mark Zuckerberg saying, quote, "They went out of their way in the movie to try to get some interesting details correct, like the design of the office. But on the overarching plot, they kind of just made up a bunch of stuff that I found kind of hurtful." But the film, in broad strokes, paints Zuckerberg as a detached, socially awkward technocrat who is actively seeking the acceptance that will never be given to him, no matter how successful he becomes. And how is any of that untrue? And beyond that, it's almost impossible to accurately recount past events as they actually happened. Very famously, when victims are recounting traumatic or physically violent events they've endured, they misremember details of the perpetrator's face or what they were wearing, or very fine details that eventually get used against them. And that fact bleeds into all aspects of filmmaking because we're imperfect beings, and for now, human beings make movies.
The performances in these self-produced biopics can never be accurate, because how can you know what someone is actually thinking? That has to be interpreted by an actor, who is interpreting a writer, who is interpreting someone else. It's a constant game of telephone, and the more you realize this, the harder it is to take a lot of these biopics that pretend to be completely accurate seriously. We're making a giant point about this, not because I think movies should just outwardly lie about real-life events, but there's an attitude of audience consumption when it comes to these types of films that I think is a philosophy that is dead on arrival. Like when a film opens with, based on a true story, you are being told that you're watching the events as they happen, so it becomes more of a historical educational document than it does a piece of art. And a lot of these biopics end up looking the same and feeling the same, and there is no admission of interpretation.
When you look at him, you think of me.
Yes, ma'am.
And that's why one of my favorite biopics is another Aaron Sorkin penned banger, which is actually the last good thing he wrote, 2015's Steve Jobs, directed by Danny Boyle. It's a film that takes aspects of Jobs' life and throws them in a 3-act play, mishmashing timelines, and it feels more like an abstract critique of a capitalist archetype than it does a still life portrait of the real person. And that practice has served well for many films over the years, including The Diving Bell and the Butterfly, First Man, Dog Day Afternoon, Christine, and most recently, the best picture of last year, Oppenheimer. Which brings us to Hillbilly Elegy, because not only is Hillbilly Elegy bad and dishonest, but so is the man behind it. I have actually dabbled a bit into the book, and a lot of the time when it comes to film adaptations of books, there is a mythologizing of the original text that borders on gospel. You see this a lot with comic book adaptations or insert recent bestseller, but you don't have to worry about that with this book, because as far as memoirs go, this is no year of magical thinking. Mind you, this book was written by a grown adult, a Yale Law graduate, but it feels like it was written by a 5th grader. There is like a lot of preamble about like where people come from and the people, and it's a bunch of fucking nonsense.
The people, does he talk about where black people come from or not at all?
He basically talks about the natives of Appalachia, the natives, you know, the natives.
Yeah, the natives
that we're looking at right now. Part of it sounds like any other culture, so it's not even special. Family, unity, loyalty, etc. And the other part of it is just him explaining how violent and reactionary they are, and it just sounds like he's describing one of the side effects of lead poisoning.
But yeah, like everyone else in our family, they could go from 0 to murderous in a fucking heartbeat.
You get it? Because he's mad, so it's like when he was a kid and was breaking things?
Yeah, this is the temperament you'd want in a vice president, I'm pretty sure. And the audiobook performed by Vance is even worse because you can kind of hear him struggling to read the words that he apparently wrote.
Lindsay told me that as a child, I had a peculiarly large and misshapen head. I will always think of Jackson as my home. It is unfathomably beautiful. It is unfathomably beautiful.
And it contains many gems left out of the film, such as
3 decades earlier, he had made the same promise to a neighbor after a dog nearly bit my mom. A week later, that dog was dead.
September 9th, you amplified what you said yourself were rumors about Haitian migrants eating pets.
I read a book called Persecution by David Limbaugh about the various ways that Christians were discriminated against. The internet was abuzz with talk of New York art displays that featured images of Christ or the Virgin Mary covered in feces. For the first time in my life, I felt like a persecuted minority. I'll never forget the time I convinced myself that I was gay. I was 8 or 9, maybe younger, and I stumbled upon a broadcast by some fire and brimstone preacher. At the time, the only thing I knew about gay men was that they preferred men to women. This described me perfectly. No one I know in San Francisco would feel ashamed to admit that they don't go to church. In fact, some of them might feel ashamed to admit that they do. Ohio is the polar opposite.
Thanks, Captain Obvious.
It's insane to me that the media back in 2016 was glazing him this hard. It's almost reminiscent of any time Joe Biden finished a sentence without having a demented brain fart.
I wouldn't have picked Vice President Trump to be vice president, but I think she was not qualified to be president. So let's start there.
So when it comes to bringing this book to the big screen, how could anything of substance be adapted when what's being adapted is garbage? We get sleepy voiceover illustrating Appalachian values that are reminiscent of the book, but in the film it's just meaningless. It's giving Blade Runner theatrical cut.
That was my profession. Ex-cop. Ex-Blade Runner.
It's giving... What was that Brad Pitt space movie?
You mean Ad Astra?
Yeah, it's giving Ad Astra.
I must accept the fact I never really knew you. Nor am I you.
I felt like I stumbled onto something, a puzzle piece, an answer to a question I'd barely begun to ask about our family.
So boring. And the film is structured in a painfully obvious way, but the tried and true structure of moving back and forth in time doesn't build to anything significant. There are a plethora of silly moments, like a young JD Vance trying to chase a dog and headbutts a coffee table like a dumbass. He gets confused by forks.
Why there's so many fucking forks?
He has a moment where he acts like saying redneck is the same as saying the N-word.
We don't really use that term.
There are several key moments that don't have connective tissue that would make it A, emotionally resonant, or B, make sense.
One of the big payoffs of the film is young JD getting a good grade on a test. But we see him doing his homework in several scenes, so we don't get a sense that school was something he was actively avoiding. Then, when he goes down the wrong path before that, JD decides he wants to steal Mama's car to impress this kid we never met.
Wait a minute! Who are you?
And then the big payoff of the adult JD timeline is JD stopping his mom from using, and then leaving her in a motel because he realizes that he can't help her, only she can help herself. Sounds like an emotionally rich place to end up narratively, right? Well, all of the scenes leading up to it are so silly and filmed from so many angles. Did we really need this many angles? The camera is quite literally all over the place. It's supposed to give you a real, down-to-earth documentary feeling, but documentaries don't even look like this. The camera is indecisive and sloppy. There are maybe a handful of shots in this film that have a purpose and feel like they were properly thought out. The rest of the visuals are just coverage. Maybe we didn't need the POV shot of a young JD Vance pissing in a cup. Maybe we don't need shots where the actors are getting cut out of the frame. Maybe shaking the camera when tensions are heightened makes people feel nauseous instead of whatever the intended effect was. But it seems like there is no intended effect, other than to give as much material for the editor to work with as possible, and the editor definitely used all of it.
So when we get these scenes that are supposed to matter, there is nothing we can connect with. And I have a feeling the edit is as it is because the scene partners Amy Adams and Glenn Close have are giving them absolutely nothing. You would think that these situations would cause someone, even internally, to have a tsunami of emotions flowing through them, but nope, not here. I see these two actors in these scenes and there's something missing. Whether there's a lack of investment, internal monologue, or charisma, they don't have the sauce, I fear. A lot of actors do this as well, but a result-oriented tactic they both use is to furrow their eyebrows to show confusion or frustration when just being in the moment and doing what actually felt right in those takes would have served them better than what either the script or Ron Howard was asking of them. You know what's funny?
What's that?
Ben Shapiro loves this movie. He said it's brilliant. It's great. When this highlights every failing of everything that he stands for, it's so interesting that there's a cognitive dissonance that like the actual issue is like the fact that the one partner guy said redneck and not all of these systemic issues that...
You're right. It really is not political. It is just an
by the bootstraps story of a kid who grows up in rough circumstances and is guided by his grandmother toward a better life and makes better decisions, and how you break cycles of cultural poverty. So Ron Howard in the movie, he kind of strips all of the politics from the story.
I need payment for the first 2 weeks to check her in.
A week? Good Lord.
Hey, this is what happens when you privatize everything. We're putting a lot of stock in how the process of getting help is capitalist nonsense, and yet, would this be okay if he had the money? Would this still be okay if he could afford it?
So Darren Franich of Entertainment Weekly said, Howard thinks he's making an inspirational tale. He doesn't realize it's an American horror story. What Darren Franich is actually objecting to in reality is the same thing that so many people on the left object to, which is that the story, JD Vance's story, really is about the idea that individual decision-making can overcome cultural impoverishment. We'll get to more of this in just 1 second, folks. But first, let me talk about why betting can be kind of a fun thing. So I used my friends over at MyBookie. Actually, I've been betting on sports as well. Putting a little money on the line can sometimes spice things up, which is just one of the reasons why I've been rolling with MyBookie this season. The fact is, in the movie, he kind of strips
all of the politics from the story.
Yeah, he's got to pull himself by his bootstraps sooner, because I got to piss. I've got to go. This film is just a dud. Not a historic all-time dud, but a dud nonetheless. As mediocre and unintelligible as the man it's based on, and the only reason why we're talking about it is because the right rich people got a hold of it. JD Vance proselytizes about how he took personal responsibility and made it on his own, but it was actually him just getting his college paid for by the GI Bill and then meeting his money pig, billionaire Peter Thiel, who brought him to Silicon Valley.
The classic formulation, I'll sort of give the Peter Thiel answer, and then I'll give the Robert Gordon answer. And I'm more inclined to sort of Peter's answer.
How does it work when you want to get rid of the rights of the billionaire who owns you?
I am proud to be gay. I am proud to be a Republican. But most of all, I am proud to be an American.
How does it work when you call someone Hitler and decide you want to be his running mate? How does one change their mind on Hitler? It's a sea of contradictions when you try to sell your soul. But the most frustrating part of this for me personally is Ron Howard directing this. 12 years prior, he directed a film called Frost Nixon. It's about these televised interviews that David Frost did with Richard Nixon. They're relevant because in them, they captured this now iconic and damning admission from the former president.
Well, when the president does it, that means that it is not illegal. By definition. Exactly.
It's a film about the importance of the camera, what you're capturing, the angle at which you're capturing it, and the power of essentially canonizing a subject by filming them, which is a pretty good lesson to bestow upon anybody because it's important. But Ron Howard then turns around and decides to point his 400 cameras at this fucking guy.
You know, when people ask me if I want to run for office, part of me wonders, like, do they think I just give off a used car salesman vibe?
Drill, baby, drill. Right, drill, baby, drill. Right, that it's such a simple line, but it's true.
I have been surprised and, you know, and concerned by a lot of the rhetoric, you know, coming out of that campaign. You know, given the experience that I had then 5-6 years ago, yeah, I'd say that I've been you know, surprised.
And you know, that statement from Ron Howard is fine and dandy, but to me, it's really interesting when people who are in those positions of power to prop up a figure or canonize a subject, and they just willfully act like they either had no part in propping them up or they just couldn't see them becoming what they became, even though people were ringing the alarm bells from Jump Street just from the beginning. As soon as Hillbilly Elegy came out, although it was a bestseller and although a lot of people were talking about it, there was a wave of people saying, hey, this book is bad. And even people from the region not too thrilled with how they are being depicted in this book. But y'all just went with it and y'all were like, we should make this a movie. And how many times has the establishment propped up a figure and then they turn out to be a monster and we're just like, well, how did that happen? Who could have seen that coming? It's only happened like a lot. I know Ron Howard said that he wanted to make a film that goes back to his roots and capture where he came from, but the guy he made a movie about sucks. He sucks. And he painted mountain people as a bunch of savages when he wasn't stumbling through childhood memories that are so nondescript. It begs the question of how did this thing even get off the ground in the first place?
She loathed disloyalty, and there was no greater disloyalty than class betrayal. Each time someone stole a bike from our porch, 3 times by my count, or broke into a car and took the loose change, or stole a delivery, she'd tell me, like a general giving his troops marching orders, there is nothing lower than the poor stealing from the poor. It's hard enough as it is. We sure as hell don't need to make it even harder on each other.
By the way, like I've seen this on both sides of the aisle, to just totally stab each other in the back, or anybody in the back if it helps them get ahead. And there's just a part of my brain that will never quite compute that type of a personality trait. But like, you've got to be loyal to your core group of people, if for no other reason than it's good for your own soul. And you know, if you're doing things that are bad for your soul, eventually it's going to come back to bite in the rear end.
Employees filed multiple complaints to the state and federal government alleging heat exhaustion, working in extreme temperatures, and lack of water breaks, though the cases were all closed with no citations.
I think about the hottest that I experienced was around 128 degrees.
Inside?
Inside. And you've seen people leaving on gurneys to go to the hospital. The second round of folks they brought in was folks on work visas.
He's gotten away with a lot of money and fame for pretending to be one of us.
Do you blame JD Vance for any of this?
I blame all of the original investors at App Harvest. The original board of directors know what was coming. You would have had to have been an idiot not to have.
In the 2023 film American Fiction, a film that I admittedly did not love, is about a writer who hasn't broke through the ceiling of mainstream success. And it makes him a little bitter. Even more bitter when he meets this character played by Issa Rae, who writes a book that exploits all the worst stereotypes of black culture, which is awful. But rich white liberals make it a massive hit because they fell in love with it and it felt real to their prejudiced experience. So Jeffrey Wright's character follows the same path and takes it a step further by making a fake memoir and then becomes forced to play the part because it becomes more successful than the one that gave him this bad idea in the first place.
Yeah, you think some bitch-ass college boy can come up with that shit?
No, I don't.
Sure, JD Vance came from Appalachia, but that is not the man he's become. And given his approval rating in those places he claims to have in his blood and all over the country, no one is falling for JD Vance's American Fiction. If you enjoyed this video, hit the like button. If you agree or disagree, tell us in the comments. Subscribe if you haven't already. Share with your friends. Do all the things. What video's coming soon? What's the next one?
Timmy C?
Timmy C, maybe? We got so many. Maybe Joker?
Yeah.
Who's to say?